Thank you for joining us today from wherever you are, whether you're back at the office or watching from home on this workday. I'm Joanne Joseph. We're about to have a conversation on the future of the South African office. Is it in the building where your company is housed, where you have to brave the traffic to commute daily, or is it in a corner of your home that you've designated your working space post-COVID, since travelling into the office became impossible in recent months? We do know there are compelling arguments for and against working from home, but what do relevant studies tell us about which is the more productive on a professional and personal level? And is it possible to attain a balance between the two? Well, that's what our panel is here to discuss with us today. Psychologist and the SADAG chair, Dr. Kalinda Linda, joins us remotely, as does property economist Professor François Verhouilly, who's associate professor at the University of Cape Town. Here in studio with me is director of Giant Leap, Linda Trim. They are, of course, a workspace specialist and the chief executive officer of Boxwood Properties, Rob Kane. Welcome to all of you. Really good to have you with us. Now, remember, if you are watching today, you have access to the live chat section next to the streaming page. All you do is direct any questions you have for particular panel members there. I'll do my best to put your questions to our experts in just a short while. But of course, the discussion needs to kick off, and I'm going to start with Kalinda at this point. Kalinda, hi there. How has people's relocation to their home offices affected them or benefited them, as the case may be, psychologically and emotionally after COVID? I'm just going to ask you to unmute yourself. Can we hear you? We've got you. Thank you, Kalinda.
So, initially we had lockdown and I think we were all terrified. And so, for the first few weeks, it was maybe a good thing because the year had started with a bang and people were exhausted. And I got overwhelmingly positive feedback for the first, say, 5 weeks. And then, of course, as humans, we are social creatures. And we started feeling, even introverts started feeling, well, I can't connect with anybody, and these are the only people I can be with. And in addition to that, as humans, we like choice. Nobody likes to be told what to do. Even the term lockdown feels offensive. And this is where it started going in a negative direction. And so, long story short, we're now dealing with what we call the second pandemic, which is the mental health pandemic. And a lot of that is to do with the social isolation, pressure cooker, people being trapped in their homes, online schooling. You're trying to work, your children are banging at the door, they can't get in. So I think this is probably very familiar for a lot of people watching.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, Linda, there's so many advantages to working from home. I was telling you why I love it. Access to the fridge primarily becomes quite important. But you did some quite extensive research last year, and interestingly, that showed that more than 80% of your employees want to go back to the office. Why is that?
So I think a lot has changed since we did those surveys, and we need to also look at where the times have changed. So there certainly are aspects that people miss about the office. They miss their friends, they miss the, obviously we have load shedding in this country, they miss the fast internet, they miss seeing people. But I think we actually now need to look way ahead. It's been 18 months since that happened, and we've realized we've been asking the wrong questions. We've been asking employees what they want, but what an employee wants isn't necessarily right for the business. A C-suite leader wouldn't stop to ask their employees via a survey about a big decision in the company. And that's more or less what we've been doing. So I think it's more important for us to now find a balance of what's right for the company and for an employee and find a middle ground.
Yeah. I mean, Kalinda, I was having a look at the recent Ipsos survey, which shows productivity is definitely down as a result of employees working from home. Some admit to lacking self-discipline. For others, the home environment is just not conducive with all its distractions. There's a lot of domestic conflict, and that sense of team cohesion in the office is also disrupted. Are we a society that needs a lot more structure and centralized authority than others?
I think we need that connection. So we need that variety of connections. So Linda was mentioning, which I think was important around teams and leaders. So I've had so many clients, and I've heard this all over the place, where you're a leader, you've been appointed during this time, you've never met your team, you're all working from home, half the time the cameras are off. So I think part of it is that there's the lack of connectedness. The bulk of your communication is non-verbal. Only 7% is verbal. So you've got these icons on your screen, you're not connecting. And of course, you're trying to lead a team where there's no cohesion. And on top of that, as you mentioned, the interruptions. Yes, there's the fridge, there's a screen, there's a dog, there are all sorts of things. So we some people are definitely more productive when they have interruption-free zones. And so if you can set that up at home, that might be okay, that kind of structure. But very few people have the ideal setup at home.
And that is a really important point, because that's something that we both spoke about. Rob, won't you weigh in on that as well? It's something that Linda mentioned earlier, that as middle-class people, we have many, many advantages in terms of being able to work from home, but that's not something most of our population can take for granted, can it?
Sure. I mean, Joanne, there's a lot of discrimination inherent in expecting people to work from home. One thing is gender bias, and another is your personal wealth and your personal circumstances. You know, if you have 2 young children running around and the husband and the wife or the partners are sitting at the dining room table, that's really not optimal.
Yeah.
And the other thing is we're seeing, and we've done a lot of research on this, there is quite a polarity. I mean, there are some industries, particularly software engineers, who can technically work from home all day, every day. I think Kalinda's point about the mental health is something that is a separate discussion. But for the vast majority of the workforce, we're seeing 2 types of people who quite like working from home. The one is the self-starters, the self-motivated people, because it doesn't matter where they are, they're going to be happy working, and they will get on with their work and they'll drive themselves. Then the other end of the spectrum, which is a polarity, is people who really don't want to work that hard.
Yeah. And there are many of those.
There are far
Let's
too
be
many,
honest.
actually.
Yeah.
But you have that disparity. And then the people in the middle, it probably suits them to work in the office, or at least part of the time. I think we know work from home is here. And the research we've done, and we've probably got 300 to 400 pages of detailed research from around the world, we think it'll be probably 1 day a week. You know, I think the work from home honeymoon, as Kalinda was saying, is pretty much over. And it's over, I think, on a personal level, because people are now starting to look at their careers, and those people that are in the office are likely to advance quicker and have more face time and get more mentoring and more training. So from a personal level, there's a cost, but also from a business level, there's a huge cost. And I think you mentioned earlier, that's now starting to come out in our economy.
And we're definitely going to be exploring that in just a moment, Rob. François, I want to hear from you on the international picture here. Workers in other parts of the world, like North America or Europe, have gone through the same sort of progression that we have during this COVID outbreak. Are they better at working from home? Do they cope better working from their home-based offices than we do?
And I think you're raising an interesting point here, and it's one that we really need to emphasize, that often we look at what happens in the US, we look at what happens in Europe, and we say, well, we can do this. And I think what we do is we miss out on the local context. The big question is South Africa ready for this? And the point, and I think it's a point that Rob has already made, and I think Linda was referring to as well. And that is it's all fine if you live in a house with a huge little office that you work from, refrigerator next to you, that works quite well. But for many South Africans, working from home is actually very difficult, and probably a lot more difficult than working from an office. So yes, I think we are starting to see a trend, and what percentage of people will go back to work, we will see. I think so. What we have to ask ourselves is not whether this is a new way of working, but for whom, and whom does it serve best, and whom it doesn't. And I think that's what companies will decide, that for some people, working from home is an option, and for others, it isn't. And I think I also just want to touch on the point that was made earlier about the psychological impact. And I think what we're picking up as well is that, if you work from home and you've got your network of people and you've gone digital with them, that's fine. But imagine a situation where you don't have that network, where you're trying to build up that network. And I can see it from a university perspective, our students entering the working environment for the first time, and I think the point was made, how do you pick up the corporate culture when you're not there every day. The efficiencies, if you have a problem at work, you swivel your chair and you say to your co-worker, help me out with this. At home, you spend the next 3 hours on YouTube trying to find the answer. So I think it's a very different environment. Yeah.
No, that's a really fair point. And of course, there's a commercial imperative as well, Rob. We know this movement from home, from offices to home, has had quite a devastating effect on the commercial property sector in the country. How bad is the situation right now?
Joan, it varies depending on the nodes. And I think we know that Sandton has been particularly hard hit. But I think the reality is that problem was coming in Sandton, and one could see it well before COVID. There'd been quite a lot of maybe over-enthusiastic development.
Yeah.
And large corporate tenants were, in some cases, literally moving across the road into better premises. So that has been compounded by COVID. But another area is Cape Town CBD being one. There are less people in the office, and it has had a tough impact on landlords. But we are starting to see that tide turning. We're starting to see people coming back into the office. The restaurants are fuller. People are lingering longer after hours and maybe going for a drink. So we do see that changing. And our business, we probably have about 250 tenants, and we're in regular dialogue with them. So really, on the ground, people are seeing the changes. And what we're also seeing is those businesses that are bringing their people back into the office are generally thriving. I think if you have all your staff working from home, your business, you can maintain your business, but it can't thrive. If you get your people with you and just your creativity is there, you just have a high EQ in the office.
Yeah.
For the last 10 years, there's been so much written about the need for EQ in business. And I think COVID has destroyed a lot of that, and we need to bring that back.
That kind of cohesion. I mean, given that there are...
John, can I just touch? Oh, sorry.
Yes. Go ahead, Francois. You're welcome to add to that.
Yeah, I just want to touch, if I may, just on what Rob was saying. I think, first of all, the property market was already entering a difficult scenario as we entered 2019. And I think we've got to be careful that some of these trends that we now pick up as being the COVID trends, some of those trends were already starting beforehand. The idea of co-working, we've seen the WeWorks of this world and others. So there was already a change taking place. The fact that this has accelerated what was happening already is probably what we're seeing at the moment. And maybe a point that we can touch on later, and that is that the future of space is not going to be about renting square meters. It's going to be about the service. And the point I often make when I go to a hotel, I don't say to myself, I'm renting 30 square meters for 2 nights. I'm buying into the service. So I think it's going to be an interesting discussion going forward. If we're going to go back to work, what will the work environment need to look like to get us there and to give us a feeling that is maybe not quite home, but gets close to what we would have if we were at home.
I think you're making a really good point there, Francois. And Kalinda, that's why I think there are both pros and cons to these different types of works. What sort of hybrid solutions should we be considering, given that, we do like the comforts of home, and sometimes we do like work to feel a little bit more like home in order to perhaps reduce the stress of working in an office environment and so forth. How do we go about reconfiguring those workspaces in that way, Kalinda?
No, I think a lot of it is about context. And I think Rob made the point earlier that certain personality types absolutely prefer being in their little corner, be it at home or be it in the office. And so I think it's going to have to be bespoke. So for some people, it's going to work maybe to go in twice a week. For other people, it might be 1 week a month. And as Francois was talking, I was thinking, well, a lot of people commute, live here and commute every 2 months somewhere else. So I think we've been doing a sort of a hybrid, but perhaps not on the scale that we're looking. So I would say step one would be to communicate, and secondly, to ask. I've been involved in 1 or 2 banks doing pilot studies, and they're actually doing this. They're actually asking people, well, look, this is new, this is untried, we've never done this before. So what's going to work best? 1 day, 2 days, 3 days? And of course, the pilot cannot go on forever. You know, we don't
Yes.
like this thing without a limit. So if they say a 2-3 month pilot study, at the end of that, you collate what works for the organization, what works for the people within the organization, and certain roles, certainly not just personalities, but roles will lend themselves as well to working more in the office or less. So if you think of something entrepreneurial, you know, the water cooler chats where you come up with the next brilliant idea.
Yes.
It's a little bit difficult to do that online.
True.
So I think the hybrid needs to be very much bespoke for each organization. And that'll obviously filter into roles, what it looks like physically, the COVID protocols. So I think that's a tall order, but it's nothing that humans can't do. Done many things before.
No, it's Kalinda, I certainly think there's a movement towards that. But Linda, I'm interested to hear from you because, first of all, we had François talking about shared workspaces. We've heard Linda talking about getting the buy-in of staff in terms of how we go about evolving spaces. So perhaps if COVID has taught us anything, it's that it need not be one binary option or the other, right? Either home or work, that it could perhaps be a more homely working environment. How do we go about evolving those types of spaces?
I think the biggest lesson we've learned is it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be home or the office. There can be a middle ground. And again, I think we need to look at our own culture and our own country to ascertain what is right and what is right for each company. Because as Linda said, very much depending on the role that you do will depend on how much time you need at the office. Certain companies have what we term an anchor, where they really need to be in the office all the time. They work with people all the time. You'll get other roles like a navigator who can come in once or twice a week. So we can't just say this is a solution. And funny enough, everyone's saying hybrid's the new office. Well, hybrid's been around a long time. Consulting companies have been using it successfully for years. And funny, with technology coming in, the only thing that's probably never been reinvented is the office. It stayed the same.
Right.
So we actually don't need people there 8 to 5. But we need to have an environment and choose what each company needs to do and how we marry people at home and how we marry people at the office. Because if everyone's not coming in at the same time, you're going to have a virtual meeting combined with in person, because how do you discriminate between the two? And one of the challenges or the things that we're facing with the hybrid office, people think, and Rob can probably comment on it more, they're cutting back so they're saving rental. But what do you do on the day when everyone wants to be in the office? Or what do you do when they've come back after their pilot and they've actually realized they've been losing out being at home, and now they all want to come back and you've given up your office? So there's so many unknowns right now.
And can I just ask you, while we're on that point, are companies going through this process as we speak, where they're assessing these in a very structured way, not just playing it by ear, but saying, how do we go about determining what kind of environment we're going to require in the future, and how do we start transitioning our company towards that?
Very much so. I think, companies have realized, and Rob also touched on it earlier, you look back and the biggest thing in any corporate world was innovation and creativity. You look at Apple, you look at Amazon, it was all about innovating. And you certainly cannot do that by keeping your people at home. So I think the three things companies have learned they've lost is innovation, creativity, and speed to market. So they've got to get people back. They cannot afford for this to carry on. So we're doing huge amounts of research to get people back. And I think the office has taken a bad hit for being seen as dangerous and a high-risk area of getting COVID. But we've actually also had it wrong. Because one, you don't get it from touch anymore. And two, your air cons are not the problem we thought it was. So the office has actually turned out to be one of the safer spots. And if companies look at all the people they've kept at home and worked out how many of those staff had still got COVID from going to restaurants, going to the movies, going to friends, the numbers would be high. But those at the office have actually been safe.
Yeah, that's interesting. Rob, I'm wondering, though, how viable from a commercial point of view the hybrid is for companies, because regardless of whether you've got people coming in 5 days a week or 2 to 3 days a week, I mean, surely the rent is still the same. Is it still viable to keep going with this hybrid option?
Viable for landlords or viable for businesses?
Okay. Let's talk about both, actually. For landlords first of all.
For landlords, I think there's going to be kind of a diverse activity going on, and our view is that the office market will shrink about 20%. And if you look at international trends, and I think it was Herman Warren of The Economist, he gave a talk, and he said we are so far behind South Africa in terms of the world, in terms of people working back in the, people coming back into the office. So that global trend is for people to come back in. Not everybody, but a certain proportion, and people will not come in 5 days a week, they may come in 4 days a week. But when they come in for those 4 days, I'm not sure they're going to be happy with a generic desk. They're going to want to sit next to their buddies in the office. And they're going to want some sort of personal feel about their desk. And one thing we've noticed, and we've done a lot of research on it within our own portfolio, is the very boring generic buildings. The office workers are coming in and they're saying, this is no longer so nice. I've tolerated it for maybe 20 years of my life, but I actually want more. And one of the buildings that we own, we were busy with quite a large, very corporate feel on the ground floor. And in our team, we sat and talked it through, and we scrapped that, and we've gone for a food market.
Wow.
And we're going to have 11 food retailers there, and it's adjacent to the foyer, but it's a very soft, tactile space.
Yeah.
And there'll be free Wi-Fi in there, so people will be able to work in their office. They'll be a bit tired, or they want to chat with somebody, and they'll go downstairs. So we're creating a warmer, more sort of appealing environment.
Yes, and less kind of sterile
Yeah.
working environment, so to speak.
So our view is, sorry to carry on, but our view is that tenants are going to migrate to those sort of landlords that manage their buildings tightly, that they're well managed. Francois used the word hotel, and I think that's a really key thing. If you can run your office building like a hotel, you're going to have a high service element to it. And those are the buildings that are going to fill up. And if you're not managing your buildings well, those are the buildings that are going to be empty.
Francois, you know,
maybe I'll come in a moment. Just it's fine. Okay.
No, well, let me ask you this question, because we were speaking about moving away from these binary ideas of either working from home or working at the office. Should we be looking a little more closely at working close to home as another possible option?
Is that a question
For you,
me,
Francois? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Look, I think that's the critical point. I think that for some people, it's not just a question of home or work. There's probably the answer lies for many working close to home, which says I don't want to work necessarily from home, but I also don't want to commute every day in the longer distance. And so I think that what this means also is that many of our suburbs could become more interesting places, where at its worst in the townships, we just have dormitories with very little around it. In some of the other suburbs, we see housing with some retailing. But if we can get that sort of home, work and play going in our suburbs, there's a good chance that we will sort of deconcentrate economic activity more broadly in our metropolitan areas. But I think and I just want to touch on one or two other points that were made earlier, which also touch on this. And that is, I think that what we will see is organizations having different types of spaces. So, for example, if you're very stable head office, well, maybe you'll own that. And then you'll have some long rented space, short rented space, and then some co-working space where if an employee happens to be on the East Rand at 3 o'clock and says, I can't get back to work, I'm going back home, where you can stop at a hub somewhere and go and work. So I think that what we'll see is organizations having not one type of space, but the type of space that best reflects a specific function. And that last type of space that I was talking about, that more core co-working space, could very well be closer to where people live. Again, is this new? You know, if we go back into the history of space, at a certain point, you went as far as you could walk, and then we had the horse, and then we had the car, and all of that influenced where we worked. The car gave us the shopping center, for example. And now the question is, it's always been about movement. And now that we move not on the concrete highway, but on the internet highway, that changes where we work, how we interact with each other. And so I think there is a continuum here in workspace from the farm the whole way to where we are at the moment.
So François, just on that note, and Rob, I'm going to bring you in here in a moment, but I mean, you're talking about all of these aspects of one's life as a worker being brought into very close proximity to you, the place where you work, the place where you play. You know, what does it actually mean? Does it mean that companies are going to be required to move their offices closer to suburbs or even into the suburbs, as maybe the case?
Jan, you know, in Paris, and they're more and more talking, in many cities in Europe, they're talking of the 15 minutes city. In other words, you should have 15-minute walk. You should be able to get to most of what you require in life. And yes, but let's also remind ourselves that, again, that's why I'm always saying, let's be very careful that when we take these concepts out of Europe, we are talking of higher public transport systems and things of that sort. I mean, for many South Africans, getting to work is a schlep. You know, it's hours on end on this. So I think that bringing it all closer does play a role. But what I would say is, ultimately, it's the company that will decide where you will work. And I think that some of the discussions that we seem to be having at the moment gives the impression that the employee will decide, I will decide where I'm going to work. Whether the company decides to put an office in a particular place will be a choice that will be made. But where the possibility does lie is, imagine an office in a suburb, which will be co-working, which you and people from other employees will be using the same type of space. It won't be your company's space. It will be like a hotel. You'll walk in, and you'll work there, you'll meet people. And so I think that comes back to my point. I think that companies will have their head offices, will have their corporate offices, plus all types of other views.
Yeah. Rob, is it workable?
I don't often disagree with François. I've known him for 20 years. He is, after all, a professor. But I really do disagree on this. I think the future of this country is in small companies. It's not in the enormous conglomerates and the old Anglo-Americans, which employed thousands and thousands of people. The growth in this country is small companies with 20, 30, 10 people. So that's where our growth needs to come from. And those companies just cannot afford, in a sense, to have 3 workplaces for their employees, because they will have set them up at home with Wi-Fi. And so there'll be a sort of office type structure at home. And then they will need to maintain an office, because from time to time that employee will come into the office and expect to be in the office. So therefore you need a receptionist there, and you need some boardrooms, some meeting rooms, things like that. The concept of a third satellite in the suburbs, I think, is great for the employee, but I think it's a disaster for the employer, because somebody has to absorb that cost. And if you look at our economy, generally companies are not doing that well. So now you're going to say to them, by the way, you now need to either rent your own office there, or you need to rent a co-working space. But I think it's also quite destructive for the employer, because the key issue, as Kalinda was saying, is kind of mental health issues and alienation.
Yes.
If somebody goes and works in a suburban office, the chances of your boss or your colleagues having access to that same office is very slim, because everyone's dotted all over, in terms of their living space, dotted all over the countryside. So I think it's either work from home or come into the office, and we'll have a a mix of those.
Yeah, yeah. Linda, let me bring you in here. I mean, we're talking about this possibility now of hybridizing these spaces in which we work, right? Sometimes working from home, sometimes working from the office, but a far more comfortable and welcoming office space, as Rob has already suggested to us. Is that going to be a viable thing to start evolving these offices? Obviously, there are cost implications for it. There's a really serious change in mindset, I think, that needs to occur, especially for us as South Africans who've worked from these traditionally very clinical, sterile offices. How's that going to happen?
So you're quite right. I mean, we are doing a number of hybrid offices for clients, and I think what we need to remember is every company is completely different. As I mentioned earlier, it's not one size fits all. So it's researching and understanding the facilities that they need. And in terms of bringing people back to the office, change management has become a huge element. It's really important for us to train people how to use the facilities. We are grappling with a number of challenges that go with it, as you mentioned earlier. Particularly a South African phenomena is that people love their own desks. And with a hybrid office, you're not going to get your own desk. So some of our clients go through the road and get back and say, everyone wants their own desk. We actually cannot cut back space, but people might only be in the office 3 or 4 days a week. So everyone's completely different. Other people are being more brutal and saying there'll only be 150 desks. We have 300 staff, so you need to book your days. But then challenges come up. Well, I wanted to sit next to my friend Peter. How do I get that? And then companies don't want you to sit next to the same person because they want to encourage interaction that people have lost. And it's quite interesting when we plan these offices and we bring teams together to work through it that haven't seen each other for 18 months. They stand in the parking lot for 2 hours afterwards. They're so starved of communication and company from each other. So we do need to get people back and find a way for people to work.
Yeah, yeah. Kalinda, I find this so interesting from many, many points of view, because perhaps this is the most important lesson we're going to learn from the mental health issues that have grown around COVID, that these are communities in which we exist, even within our offices. We want to be able to connect with people on a human level in order to be able to achieve that goal reality of getting the work done as well.
Very much so. You know, I think the me versus the we, that's always been the issue. So if I look, you know, I've been listening with great interest to what everybody said, and there's so many things that I'd love to be commenting on. And I think the one I'd like to suggest is around the commute. So something I think Francois mentioned, it was mentioned, that often it's not going back to the office or not, but it's the commute aspect. So if we really look at this, as a working mom, I liked that I didn't have to commute somewhere extra when the kids weren't at school. The office was not the problem. So I think we need to look at flexibility in terms of that. And of course, it could be pie in the sky because somebody's got to pay for all this. But if you want people to be productive and you look at what's going to be the best fit for them, I think that's really what the answer is. So whether it's a community thing, whether it's your own desk, whether it's your desk at home and you never come in or you come in once a week, but I think once we've established that, it's got to be fairly fixed, because otherwise it becomes too woolly. So obviously economically, one can't just pay for whatever anybody feels like today. It would be nice, but it's probably not going to happen. So once we've worked it out, I think we need to have, okay, this is the new hybrid context. So these are typically the days you come in. These are the days you go to the hub. These are the days you work at home. Because we like that certainty. We don't like these shifting sands all the time. Well, most people don't. Some personalities do. And perhaps I could just bring in the word context. So, you know, there are a bunch of us here, 6 of us who work together. And even during lockdown, we all came to our offices. And even if you sort of said hello from a distance, the context of here, my things, a proper Wi-Fi connection. And when I'm here, I put on a particular work mode. So context is also very important. And this speaks to what was said earlier, that at home, do we have the right setup? What is the context when we're at home? It's much harder when the kids are banging on the door, even if it's locked. But some days you don't really want to leave home. You just want to be still. So context matters because context sets the tone. And a lot of people are asking me about the psychology of the hybrid. So my answer to that would be context as well. That on a morning when you wake up and you know you're going to be commuting there, then you wake up at a different time, you dress a different way, you have a coffee along the way, you know, things are a bit different, but there's a context of I'm going there today. If there were a hub, there would be a different context. These are people it's not going to be my bespoke desk or my place. If you're going to work from home, there's a context that you're working in, and your chunks of work, rest, and play look different. So context for me is really going to be what matters. And then once we've finished with the pilot, we need to actually have some kind of normality. Okay, this is what it's going to look like for the foreseeable future. I just don't know that it's viable any other way.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because
Brian,
yes, Francois, go ahead and add to that.
first of all, Rob, thank you very much. In life, I seek people who disagree with me. And that's how we take discussions forward. I get nervous when people don't disagree with each other. But the point that I've made for quite a while is that for many South Africans, life is what I call works on the 40s. A 40 square meter house, 40 kilometers away from where I work, where I spend 40% of my income on transport and I spend 40% of my time commuting. Now, for many South Africans, we need to change that. And I think that when we talk about work, I think we've got to be very careful that we take a more general perspective. And the question is, how do we change those 40s? Well, I would hope we can do it in the 20s, you know, where maybe you will end up with a 20 square meter flat in town, in the CBD of Cape Town or Joburg, where your work will be closer, where you won't be spending. And you know, when you end up spending 30% of your income on transport, which is just as high as what you should be spending on rental of your income, now we've got a problem here. So the question we also have to ask ourselves is, through new work practices, what can we do in South Africa generally to improve the lives of people? And I certainly believe that our CBDs have an enormous potential to achieve that for many people. And I don't want to spend too much time on it, but mixed use in this country has been the higher end of the market. How do we bring home, work, play, education to South Africans in a direction of 15%, where these sort of ratios that I was talking about are reduced? And I think that's the exciting part of our ability to use technology, work practices to break down the legacies of the apartheid city in South Africa. Anyway, let me leave it at that.
But that's a very, very important point you mentioned, Francois. And of course, that has impacted on the quality of life of so many people. So, Kalinda, let me put this question to you. I mean, these are the unfortunate realities that we experience that Francois has alluded to there, particularly in the larger metropolitan cities where people have to travel long distances between work and home. They get home late from work. They have limited family time. They have to rise earlier in the morning to get to work on time. So talk to me about this hybrid solution of working, reconfiguring our spaces, reconfiguring our lives, so that important issue, quality of life, that has become so apparent to us that we lost before COVID. So that's one of the potential lessons that we can glean from the experience that we've had, this shift that's taken place since COVID, and actually start absorbing that notion of quality of life, not just into our private lives, but that the companies that we work for start absorbing that into how they design a working life for their employee.
You know, I think everybody today has been along the same track. And I know, Francois, you want us to disagree, but I think on this one we agree that we want quality of life, don't we, at the end of the day? And from the psychology side of it, it's all about the fit. So speaking for myself as a working parent, I quite liked when school was only twice a week and I commuted there twice a week and then the office. And I've had this feedback from a lot of people where they quite like going in some days. And even, you know, people who work, say, helpers in the home or receptionists, cleaning staff, I have conversations with everybody. And a lot of them have said, well, coming in a little bit later has been great. So I think that a lot of it is to do with dialogue and fit. And, you know, again, I've said at some point, I think the pilot should end and we then need to get into the next incarnation of what it looks like. But work-life balance is always going to be an issue. I think it's always going to be a challenge. There's no magic answer and there's no static, I'm in balance now. It's like riding a bike, you know, it's constantly like this. So will it look like it used to? No. I don't think we can ever really go back. Once you've seen the change, working from home, you can't really change back to how we used to be. And maybe that's a good thing, that we stopped, we took stock, we looked at, well, where are my stresses? Am I productive sitting in the car or in public transport for an hour a day? Is there a way of negotiating that perhaps I have that 20-minute commute because I come in an hour later? So I think if we can embrace opportunity and flexibility, there's been a lot of loss. There's certainly been a lot of trauma. But if you think about nature, think about a flower, the flower falls off and then there's the seed. Then the seed falls off and then the next tree grows. So if we could move progressively all the time and think, okay, what are the opportunities? So we've seen that the commute is a stress here. We've seen that if we tweak the hours, people are more productive. And they're leaving an hour early, but they're way more productive when they're actually there. So from the psychology side of it, I would look at that. What is the best fit? What makes you most productive? And if you look at the research, work is good for people. People get into flow twice as many times at work as they do anywhere else. But why does everybody want to get to Friday? Because there's a perception of a lack of autonomy. So if we can address that, okay, the autonomy, the fit, the choices, let's try and dialogue that. I promise you people are much more productive.
And of course, Linda, that's your day job, right? That's what you do. You transition people from one type of office space into another. And it seems to me we need to start thinking of the workplace of the future in our country, but also taking into account that we're now a global village, right? South Africa had got used to being very isolated. That reality is now old. We're 26 years into the future. People are working across time zones now, across geographies, which is what we want to encourage. What are some of the strategies that are going to shape the workplace of the future, particularly in our country, Linda?
So I think there are a number that we need to look at. We need to sort of re-envision what the office is going to be, and we need to see it as a tool. It's very much the Kodak Henry Ford moment for the office, and I think for landlords as well, we need to create flexibility for companies and for people. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We need to get back to innovating, creating, and we can only do that by bringing people back. As you mentioned earlier, newcomers are not being mentored. There's a lack of leadership. When you work from home, you've got to ask 3 emails, 3 phone calls before you get an office, where I think Francois said, you swivel your chair at the office and you get the answer. So we need to get away from the rigidity of it. 8 to 5, I think, has probably become a little bit staid. But when we also take that away, it throws people's life-work balance away, because people end up working at all hours and feel that they have to respond, which is also a question that's sort of been thrown out there. But very much what Colinda said is, we all know if we've got to get up for something the next morning, we do it. And I think we can't give people too much choice. Flexibility is great, but we've got to find a way for people to re-enter the workforce again. And that's why it really needs to be seen as a tool, and we've got to entice people back. There's certain things they've loved at home, and we can bring many of those elements back into the office. It doesn't have to be that they're coming into the office for a desk. It's got to be that much more. A great cup of coffee, wonderful places to meet their friends at a water cooler, better technology that they're going to have at home, ergonomic furniture, better Wi-Fi connection. There's so many different things. And in fact, in America, one of the things they found when they brought people back that they'd missed the most was paper. And the tactileness of printing something in the photocopier or their printer, not always working on a screen. So we've got to find a balance between home and the office. And I think the biggest thing companies are realizing is previously their offices maybe didn't entice people back. And just before COVID, we were moving into the office being an experience, and people were appointing chief experience officers. We've got to get back to that it's a place people want to come to, even if it's not 5 days a week.
It's so interesting, Rob, the kind of transition that the commercial property sector would be undergoing at this point. When you think of repurposing the office, the future office, what would you say property specialists, even employers, need to take into account now?
Okay, there's quite a lot in that. Firstly, as business people, I think Linda's right. Business owners and CEOs and management are a lot more flexible and a lot more conscious of what their staff need, and the need to be able to leave early or late and just have flexible hours, some days work from home. So I think that's happening, and I think business has responded to it quite well. Then from a landlord perspective, I think that's also happening. And one of the things we spoke about before the program began was the conversion of offices into residential.
Yes.
And in the city centre of Cape Town, that's been successful, and I know there's a lot going on in Sandton at the moment. And there's been a response there, and as a country, we're very entrepreneurial. And the response has been that people can no longer afford these luxury apartments. And they're a lot smaller and a lot more budget, but it's good space. And you can walk to work. And I think that's very successful. And if you look at the very successful cities in the world, London, Paris, New York, there's a lot of people that can walk that 15 minutes to work. And I think city centres will remain robust. I don't think there's going to be a decentralization. I think people are coming into the office and they're enjoying the vibe. They're enjoying walking out into the street at lunchtime and being able to have a go of coffee or just walk around and just see lots of people. And I think we have to take a step back and figure out, why do city centres fall? I mean, cities like London and Paris have been around for centuries.
Yeah.
And if we think fast Wi-Fi is going to destroy that or reverse that trend, I don't think that's true. So there's a huge opportunity through the spectrum for landlords and businesses to really upgrade their offering and to rethink how they're offering it. But I think we'll recover. And I don't know why, but my gut feel is in November in Cape Town.
Yeah.
Everyone comes out in November because the sun starts shining. But there's going to be a shift in what people want. And we're already seeing it in the restaurants. There's a thing in Cape Town called First Thursdays where all the art galleries are open. That's full. And people are wanting that human contact. And the essence of a city centre is business efficiency. And if people are working from home, that's just not happening. When you have people close together, you have business to business efficiency, but within your business, you also have efficiency of your staff. And I think those are two things that are going to drive people back into the office.
Well, let's ask a couple of our questions, because quite a number of them are coming through from our audience, and they're really good questions. A question for Colinda. Colinda, what is the correlation between mental health and productivity? Could it be that organizations are not sufficiently analyzing the correlation? Great question.
Gosh, that is a huge, huge question. So there've been all sorts of research around this. And at the end of the day, it's really about motivation, isn't it? So when somebody is just present, or this presenteeism, absenteeism, and we know that that's a problem. Presenteeism is worse. And there's a new word called languishing that we're banding about at the moment, which is really just another form of burnout. So in terms of productivity, a lot of it is to do with motivation. And I think what Rob was talking about earlier was, for me, around perception. So if we have a perception that, right, I'm going in, we're going to do this together, I'm going to meet with my team, and I'm going to have a chat with my people from a point of social support. So if we have all of that going, we're more likely to be motivated. Now, some people want a little bit of that, and then they want this interruption-free zone, and they're more productive like that. So there's definitely not one size fits all. This is a huge field of study, and we haven't found the silver bullet quite yet. But a lot of it is around fit, having a good fit between the person's perception of their team, of what they're doing, the goal. Some people don't really care about a goal. They're doing it for the money or for the status. So you can see it's a massive field, and there is unfortunately not one simple answer.
So that segues quite well to a question for you, Rob. How important is corporate culture to corporate success?
I think it's absolutely critical. And I just don't know how that won't get eroded with people working from home for large portions of time.
Yeah.
We're a young company, and we, apart from me, very young in the office. But there is an ethos and a working together and a teamwork that's really tangible. We just had a guy start with us on Monday. That's the first thing he said. He said, I can feel the energy. I'm not sure you can get that working from home. So that culture and your ethics, absolutely critical.
Here's a related question from TJV for you. In the research you have, did it not become clear that there's a difference between the number of working hours versus actual productivity? The two are not necessarily related, TVJ is asking.
Absolutely.
TJV,
And it speaks to that inefficiency where normally, as Francois was saying, you swivel around and you ask a colleague, how do I do this? As opposed to spending 2 or 3 days working on something and it's wrong.
Yeah.
But you've been working from 7 in the morning till 9 at night. It's not necessary to work those hours. If you can get regular input from your colleagues, you can be a lot more efficient. And that creativity and that exchange of ideas, that's where business makes money. That's where this country's entrepreneurship really comes from.
So on that note, Linda, here's a question from Nadeem for you. Nadeem asks, how can businesses integrate a system that can monitor the productivity of your employees without micromanaging your staff to the point of irritation? It's a really good question.
It's a very hard thing to do. And funny, pre-COVID, it's what people were trying to move away from, was managing productivity. Because we kind of had worked out you'd got it wrong. If you provide a good environment for people, they will produce what they need to. And funnily enough, pre-COVID, they'd done studies, and the most disengaged people were the people that never came to the office. The second least engaged were those that always came to the office. So very much what you're saying is you've got to rather give people flexibility and a mixture of both. But I think we don't want to be measuring people's productivity on the hour all day. There's so much that comes just from having a chat at the water cooler.
That's so true. It's certainly not to be taken for granted. But here's an interesting question for Francois that deals with an entirely different issue. And Francois, I'm not sure if all of this falls into your domain, but I think please do try to answer as much of it as you can. Will the rate of vaccination accelerate a return to the office? And to what extent do you believe companies will mandate vaccinations in order for people to return?
Yeah, Joanne, I mean, it's a tricky point. And look, the movement to work could well be influenced by issues of this sort. And I think what we're going to start seeing is companies taking different views. I recently saw an example where a company in the United States took a view and said, well, if you're not vaccinated and you come back to work, we've got to put many things in place at work to accommodate for you for this, and we're going to charge you accordingly. So there'll be a little thing coming off your salary slip for the cost of the extra facilities that we need to do to get you back to work. So it's going to take time. And I think what will happen is, and I think part of the discussion we've had this morning as well, it's a bit like moving into the green transition and with our economies. It's the transition that can be painful. I think we all can see what the future of work will look like, but how we get there and how it will affect different people, vaccinated, not vaccinated, poorer, richer, depending on type of work. I think that's going to be the interesting discussion going forward. But I think that when there's a call back to work, you will need to come back to work, whether it will be vaccination, passports, and others. I think that's still up for debate.
Yeah. Rob, a question from Johan to you. Do you think South African organizations were ready for this big work from home transition, and have they fully adapted at this stage? I wanted to just add to Johan's question, take a little bit, a step further, in that we're talking about all sorts of transitions now, and I'm in doubt as to whether South African employers are flexible enough to make this transition, or whether, as with many other issues, we simply stay stuck in the past because that's the way we've always done things.
Yeah, I think all of that's true, actually. I think in business, we are in some ways very entrepreneurial, but in other ways stuck in our environment. But I think COVID has broken that link for us. And all the tenants that we talk to, they're in a state of flux now, and they're saying to us, well, we don't know whether we're going to need more space or less space, or whether we want a long lease or a short lease. And we're saying to them, look, the next 6 months is going to be quite critical So don't make a decision now. Just play it out. Because we are in a state of flux. And to be honest, I think for business it's very positive. It's quite a major change for us. So business and landlords are kind of rethinking the way they work. Perhaps, in my view, my humble view, the power has shifted a bit too much towards employees. And I think if we want to get our economy going, we need to have more of a balance. And employers are going to be needing to be saying, guys, you've got to come back. When I talk to lots of corporates and the CEOs, their official policy is, no, you can work from home as often as you like. When I actually talk to the CEOs one-to-one, they're saying, no, we really want people back in the office. This is not working for us, but we're a little bit reluctant to force people back into the office in case they get COVID, which is perfectly understandable. But I think business is going to suffer if we don't adapt and work together.
You know, that's such an important point you make. And one of our viewers has actually asked this question. Kalinda, I'm going to put it to you. This person asks, is there not a disconnect between what employees might want, the convenience of working in tracksuits and doing domestic chores throughout the day, versus what is actually best for company culture and productivity? Some people have actually merged those personal aspects of their working lives quite well. Is there not going to be a resistance to going back to the office, just based on that simple experience?
You know, resistance and the grass is greener and FOMO, I think these are things we all know about. So, you know, we want to be at home in our tracksuits and we don't want to go back to work. And when we're at work, then we don't want to be there. So this is human nature. We're always resisting. And so wherever there's a force, there'll be another force resisting. So I like what Francois said earlier about a transitional phase. And I would then link that to the pilots that people are doing. By all means, have a phase where it's completely flexible. We're listening to you. What is it that you want? What makes you more productive? Here is a phase. When that phase has ended, then I think this is where whoever the leaders are going to have to make a call and make a decision. So we know Discovery recently said mandatory vaccination. Some people thought it was great. Some people kicked and screamed. Pretty much what we'd expect, no matter what comes out. So I think it's very important, and I think Rob has mentioned this, that leadership is clear, that it's direct and it's consistent. At the moment, we're doing a pilot, flexible. When this ends, this is now going to be the policy. We have looked at all the factors and we've looked at what's viable. We hope that this is going to suit most of you. And that's just going to have to be how it is. There's the context. So you can either fit or you might have to then look at adjusting and moving on. But we have to get some certainty back, definitely.
Yeah. I'm going to be naughty and try to squeeze two questions into the last 2 minutes. So Linda, quick one for you from Dom. What's the general feel for SMMEs? Do you think once we've achieved more than 50% of the population vaccinated, they'd be eager to return to an office-based environment or work from home?
I think they prefer to come to the office. In fact, we've got a company, Future Space, which is a co-working space, and the occupancy is at 80 to 90% because those people don't have the setups at home. People don't have the ergonomics, the chairs, the lighting, the tech, and they can network, a point that came up earlier, with other people, because if you don't have a network and you're young, you can't do business. And you've got to be able to build that up. So they're desperate to get out.
Yeah, that's a reality for many SMMEs, I think. Francois, literally 1 minute from you. In our earlier conversation off air, you referred to this COVID experience as the trailer of the future, which I quite like. What does the highlight package predict in terms of work-life play conventions for us in the future?
I think that, and if I can just summarize a bit also the points that I've heard this morning around this. And yes, I think that we've seen the trailer of the future to some degree. We'll go back a bit to where we are. But I think what is more important is that this environment has shown us the possibilities. Things that were no-nos, no discussion 2 years ago. The idea, let's send people home and work from home, would just, you'd have said, well, have a cup of coffee and thank you for your input and be sent off. But I think, but the only thing is possibilities come with uncertainty. And I think it's that world of those uncertainties that we are dealing with. And it's the uncertainties that these new possibilities have given us, which we are going to have to transition through. Yeah.
Oswald, thank you for that. What an intriguing conversation, and it's going to be with us for quite some time to come. Of course, employees are grappling with the way forward, companies grappling too. Let's hope discussions like these sow a seed for how the office of the future could look. Thank you for joining us on these Business Day Dialogues Live, and thank you to our panel members for their input and advice. Thank you to you, our audience, for your excellent questions. From me, Joanne Joseph, take care. Bye-bye.